Hi, thank you, and welcome everyone. I hope you have a nice day here at JCon 2021 with some enjoyable and delightful talks. In this session here, I'm going to talk about architects and how they fit and how they can foster autonomy of software engineering teams. My name is Pascal Euhus. I'm an engineer, cloud specialist, and I'm currently working at Reservix, which is a German ticketing platform that helps organizers to conduct events with services that range from selling tickets to email marketing tools and access control and a lot of other stuff here. And in my spare time, I love to hike, especially in the mountains. And during the last years, we started to rethink our understanding of the role of an architecture within our organization. And this led to the statement that architects can have negative impacts on autonomy, which is a quite heretical statement there, because an architect literally has many things to do and shouldn't. The last the architect should do is have a negative impact on the developing process of software. Now, let's have a closer look on what autonomy is about and what's the purpose of being an architect and what the tasks are that an architect has to do. This smart guy here, very old, is Immanuel Kant, famous philosopher, and he found a good definition for what autonomy is. And he said it's a right for one to make their own decisions, excluding any interference from others. And he sees the autonomy as the capacity to make decisions through one's own independence of mind. So mapping this to software development, we have several teams and they develop some products and services, and the decisions they have to make are either often technological decisions, and the best is to take these decisions without having to talk to other teams, without dependency to others. What is an architect out there? There are different kind of profiles of being an architect. You could either be a software architect, a system architect, a solution architect, an enterprise architect, and a lot of other different kind of architects. And as broad as the range of being an architect is, there are several interpretations of what a role of an architect should at least do. And a common opinion out there is that it's the one who takes decisions. She's more related to the C-levels than to the development. She's responsible for the quality of the software and has to enforce standards. Now, this strongly contradicts to the idea of being of autonomous team, because it shifts the responsibility for core decisions away from the teams and prohibits the willingness to take over responsibility, which is essential for the team's autonomy. So an architect literally shouldn't be that guy who's the lifesaver. And Gregor Hope, author of the book Architecture Elevator, redefines that role of being an architect. A simple organization could look like that. We have a development department, and the requirements come from the business department, and there's also a management level in there. And the idea of Gregor is that an architect is inside an elevator, riding through those floors and understand the need of the different floors and their point of view on our systems. So it's about speaking several languages, not from a technical perspective, but also from a business perspective, and understand technical and non-technical requirements for our software, as well as the organizational constraints and their impact on the development process. Four key soft skills that an architect should have is probably being a communicator through those floors and connecting them together, departments and the different business departments, to foster some trust and being some kind of enabler between different departments. Trust doesn't mean that, does especially in this context mean that he shouldn't dictate what kind of quality goals some software departments should fulfill, but in many contexts it is essential that some boundaries are set to prevent uncontrolled technological growth, of course, and in several scenarios there are even more boundaries necessary. However, an architect should keep in mind that each decision potentially limits the team's autonomy. Because if they're not understanding why a boundary exists or why it has to follow certain roles, it leads to frictions and rejections from within the development teams and the responsibility to take this to follow this decision guidelines. Let's have a quick look at a simple example. So our system landscape can look like this. We have a shop system and accounting and a shipping system. Those systems are connected and via an API or event-driven, and we align our development teams along those products. There are nowadays two common scenarios. We have functional or we have cross-functional teams, where the cross-functional approach blurs the lines for responsibility and capabilities to make decisions in contrast to the functional teams. Now, what does that mean? Is if we decide to design our teams in a functional way, we have some backend developers put together the front end and the database. And if we have our services, each team has to talk to each other and are dependent on each other in case they have to develop further features and support the product through its life cycle. Now, this causes frictions across this on a communicational level, because there's a lot of stuff that needs to be clarified, and potentially each project involves all of at least two of the teams. Because if we go and assign a whole product to the backend department, for example, we end up with a software which has a performant and nice and shiny backend, but in the end lacks of front-end and UI capabilities. To fix this, we could have addressed our teams in a cross-functional way. So we put different skills together into one team, and then we are able to assign them directly to a product, and they can now support a whole product lifecycle and accompany it. However, the systems are still communicating, and it's within the teams to regulate the communication, to design well-defined APIs and events, etc. So there's always a social aspect about developing software. At least this is what we also learned from Conway's law, that organizations are constrained to design systems that are reflecting the communicational structure. So referring to a software development process, you need to ensure that someone is taking care of discovering and removing any negative influence on social interactions between all involved departments, not only the development departments, but on all other as well. An architect could go and create a shared global understanding of a system and the business needs. Let's see how you can settle the architects within your organization. Crackerhope defined 4 possible patterns here. We have one level above the development parts. We have the architect as a mediator between managers and developers to help to make decisions, but at least the decision is actually made by the architect and put downstream to the development departments. This leads to the notorious ivory tower, because the architect is not within the team and is not really getting, it's hard to get feedback from how its decision may influence the production. And guidance should also always be checked against the reality. A more team-centric approach is to have someone dedicated with a dedicated role within the team. So you at least have someone who's called the architect, and he's sitting directly in the team and helps to develop features and maintain the software. However, you still have someone who's, so you have some clear communication path, and but you have only limited it to one person, which is capable to make decisions. Another approach is to have architecture without architect. So the architecture somehow happens, but the team is always aware of that. So literally every member of this team can become at certain time an architect and take decisions, which are then to be accepted by the team. However, this is a quite heavy to achieve pattern, because the team has to have a lot of discipline and trust and maturity to be able to take those decisions if they are necessary to take by each team member. And it could lead to some pattern, something like this, where not really clear who is the architect, and the architecture somehow happens, but there are not really boundaries, not really, nobody is really sure about how it evolves, and nobody has really shared and common understanding of the system landscape. So this is probably an overestimation about the capabilities within the team, and could have a negative impact on the architecture then. Let's go through the architects as part of a team. So we have our cross-functional team here, and now we want to have someone who's filling out the role of an architect and within our team to foster the autonomy of this team in perspective of the architecture. It is not mandatory to have a dedicated role within the team. It could also be an extension like we see in the following. However, with such pattern, we have tried to fix this frictions across the communication lines, and we have someone who is in charge of taking care of the social impacts. So first of all, we have a closer look at someone who has a dedicated role within the team. The team has to accept this person, but it's clear who takes this decision. So you have someone who is responsible and in charge for the architecture. However, there are some scaling limits if you have multiple teams and would like to follow this. You always need someone who's able to fill out the role of an architect. And another point is that such pattern could increase intransparency across the teams, because within a team you have clear defined roles. However, the decisions that are made are not always obvious to others or transparent to others. So you should think about going along with something like architecture decision records or open documentation about your decisions the team makes. This person could also be a kind of single point of failure and become this guy here, because it's all is centralized within that person, and this person is in charge of the architecture for the team. So to fix this, we could use the architecture without the architect pattern, but nevertheless, it's hard to achieve because it depends quite a lot on the team's maturity. Every team member has to be able, or at least the maturity of the team members have to be have to be capable to take decisions regarding the architecture. So we could scale a bit better, but we need the people always to be able to fill out role of an architect, at least temporarily. And it leads to the overestimation to people if we do not care about the cognitive load of such team members. Because now the architects are, at the first place, they are the developers, so they have to develop the software, to maintain it, to create features. And it requires a lot of team organization within the team, but in the organization as well, because you need to ensure that that everybody is aware of the organization within the team. And if you overestimate your team members, it could increase your cognitive load and cause further frictions during the communication and to other teams. Another approach, not team-centric, is the architects as a service approach. And this is something that we are currently using in our organization as well. We have our cross-functional teams out there, and we introduced something like community of practice. It's not really a team, but a group of people which are which are doing the architecture literally. And so they are clear responsibility towards the teams. They proactively offer you help to the teams. And if a team feels that they have to discuss something about the architecture or needs some further help, or needs to design how a new service, for example, they can request and hire an architect for at least the beginning of a project or during a project, but it's always limited in time. So for example, the shipping service decides to launch a new service or tries to improve something, then they could hire an architect for 2 months. And this architect goes into the shipping team and helps them to get started and to find solutions. So this cumulative practice of architects centralizes the flow of information between the teams and takes care of the communication, as well as they are capable to share now success stories across the teams. These guys in the community of practice should become this guy, because an architect is in this context not seen as a problem solver in terms of sharing solution. They don't provide solution, they help to get on the right track. They identify and remove social barriers, and they have a big part of enabling. So an architect has to have a lot of skills to enable, to help them to get things done, to help them to take the decision. So the decision that is to be taken is in the responsibility of the team. At the end, it's fostering the communication, connecting each other, and foster the trust across the teams, and as well as the enabling. So this is the 4 soft skills, key soft skills, talking about an architect in this context here. The overall goal here is, with such an architect as a service approach, that we enable the teams to reach this this pattern here. We enable the enablement is to foster the autonomy, and nothing is set in stone. So if you feel that it doesn't work out for you, you can go back if you need and introduce at least an interims architect, for example, within a team, and then try to get your frictions out of the team. The organizations are dynamic and they evolve over time, so you need to evolve your teams as well. In the end, it's all about the teamwork, and an architect should at least try to help them to get forward, to enable trust, communication, and to share the global understanding of the system and of the business needs, so that the team members, the developers, are also aware about how the business sees your system, but they shouldn't talk the language of the business or the manager floor. They have to get it a bit in an easier way, and this is the work of the architecture. If you like to read further, I can recommend you the Software Architect Elevator from Gregor Hope, which is quite interesting, as well as the Team Topologies book from Matthew Skelton and Manuel Paes, which is about organizing teams which are optimized for fast flow. And at the end, I'd like to share my sources out there, and I'd like to thank you. If you want to reach me out, I'm available on Twitter, LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with you. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Hi, Clemens Guggenberger here. I have a question regarding your architect as a service approach, where you have communities of practice. How do you make sure that the architects can kind of like put down their current task, whatever they are working on, and leave the team for 2 months and come back? So I think that makes the planning for the team really hard.
Yeah. Of course, if you decide to go along with the architect as a service approach, you shouldn't at least have only 2 architects. Probably it depends on your number of teams, of course. But the general flow is that a team recognizes that it probably needs some kind of guidance or some help from an architect, and raises a request. And an architect, the community of practice is organized that way that that they try to split their work across the team. So if there's really a need to have an architect for at least 2 months, it's okay that it's blocked, and every other project has no access to this guy, at least the main time they're working. So let's say 100% of the working time of an architect, you can at least assign 80% to the team and 20% for organizational stuff or something.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's important to understand that we also made we also discovered that a team requesting, for example, help for 2 months, it could literally go a bit longer or even shorter. Depends on the team, on how fast they are able to get on the track with the solution.
As a follow-up question, how do you ensure knowledge transfer or a transfer or continuity of his historic decision making? Because sometimes decisions are made in a very specific context, and this might not be obvious a couple months or years later. And if the people that are working on those decisions are always changing, it might fluctuate between personal taste and experience and whatnot.
Yep, that's right. And one of the solution here is to think about something like architecture decision records, to have kind of version of your decisions made. Documentation in general is a good idea here. And what's good in terms of decisions that are made that have an impact on several teams, so global decisions, for example. This community of practice can organize something like whiteboard talks, open discussions, where they invite literally the developers or the stakeholders which are affected by this decision, and then they kind of make discussions. They lead the discussion, and everybody who is answers or worries can just jump in and directly get into the discussion and take part of that. It's of course an investment of time for such decisions, but it increases the transparency and the understanding of how decisions are made.
Thank you.
Any further question? Okay, if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to ping me on Twitter. I'm happy if we have a chat. And other than that, I wish you a very nice day here at JCon 2021 and hope to see you soon.